Okay, so since we spoke about some of the properties of the EC2 instance, we will also look at some additional properties that we can also do for an EC2 instance regarding monitoring or regarding status checks, or let's go and look at how do we connect to an EC2 instance first before doing all of this. So you can click on your EC2 instance, click on the connect button on top. It will give you specific instructions as to how to connect to an EC2 instance. So you can see over here the same commands that I did through the terminal window. Those same commands are mentioned over here. So for a restrictive read, you can go ahead and use the chmod 400 command on your keypad. And then to connect to the EC2 instance, he is asking you to use the public DNS endpoint, because irrespective of how many times your EC2 instance is stopped and started, you will get a new DNS endpoint as well as a new public IP. So that is the problem when you're going with EC2 instances without an elastic IP or a static IP. So since it's coming from the Amazon's pool of IP addresses, each and every time you go ahead and stop and start your EC2 instance, you get a new public IP, right? So that's something that you'll have to remember. And one more thing that I would like you guys to remember is, since right now when you worked with security groups and you pasted your my IP onto the security group, each and every time that you restart your router or you switch off your router and switch it on, your public IP may change. So that time you may lose access to your current EC2 instance. So you have to go back to the security group and update your public IP on the security group so that you are able to access. Okay. So what I mean by that is, so let's say for this Shakti EC2 instance, he has a security group over here. So in this security group, under inbound rules, he has SSH traffic to go to his public IP. So now if suppose he switches off his router and he switches it on, he gets a new public IP. So at that point of time, always remember the first point of troubleshooting, always the first point of troubleshooting to access your EC2 instances operating system is your security group from my point of view. So always look at your security group, whether you have access to your EC2 instance. So if your public IP has changed, check it with my IP command on Google, and then go ahead and modify your security group to go ahead and look at your particular IP address. So just go ahead and drag down and choose my IP over here so that it updates your public IP address over here, if at all it has changed when you are restarting your router at your home. Okay. So now going back to instances, what are some other modifications that we can do? So let's see. Okay. So for the Shakti EC2 instance, under actions, you can see that we have instance state, which gives us modifications for whether we want to stop our EC2 instance or put it in hibernate. But obviously for the T2 micro instance, we don't have the opportunity to put it to hibernate because we did not enable that configuration when we launched the EC2 instance. So the hibernate option has to be enabled at launch. You can reboot your EC2 instance. You can terminate your EC2 instance. Okay. So these are the options that you get when you go to the instance state. Now let's look at some other options that we get when we go for instance settings. Okay. So when we go for instance settings, you can go ahead and add or edit tags. You can attach or replace an IAM role. So this was brought out in the year of 2017, where before, when you went ahead and launched an EC2 instance, you were only able to associate an IAM role when you launched an EC2 instance, not after you have launched the EC2 instance. But now after 2017, when they brought out this configuration, you were able to associate IAM roles even after you launched the EC2 instance. So that's very much possible. So you can click on attach replace IAM role, go ahead and choose an IAM role over here, and then associate that IAM role by clicking on apply. Okay. Now let's look at one more configuration under instance settings. You can go ahead and change the termination protection. So this termination protection goes ahead and allows you a way to safeguard your instances from being terminated. It's a simple checkbox that you have to enable. Click on termination protection. It's disabled right now. You can go ahead and click on enabling it. So when you click on enable, you will not be able to terminate your instance. So let's check whether we are able to do that. Click on instance state, click on terminate. You can click on yes, terminate, but then it's grayed out because you have to change the termination protection. Okay. And don't give anyone access to terminate your EC2 instances. And in IAM policies, you can do this based on tags also. Very much possible. So I'm going to go back and change the termination protection to disable it. Okay. Now let's look at one other property under instance settings. You have view or change your user data. But when you do the view or change your user data, I will talk about user data a little bit later. Probably, I think for now we'll park it on the side. So when we study about user data in the next class, we will study about modifying the user data. You can change the shutdown behavior. So by default, the shutdown behavior is set to stop. You can change it to terminate. So when you change it to terminate, what happens is when you go ahead and stop your instance, it does not actually stop. It terminates your instance. Okay. So, I mean, they have also given this property, but I'm not sure of any particular use case where you would use this, but they have given you this configuration also. So when you want to shut down your EC2 instance, do you want it to stop or do you want it to be terminated? So that option is also present. So other than that, under instance settings, you can also get your system log. So you can see the system log, but you'll have to wait for some time until it's generated after your EC2 instance is started. So we will probably look at it in another class. So you can go ahead and also go ahead and get the instances screenshot. Okay. So you can see over here, you can just get this instances screenshot as to what's happened during the booting of that instance. Okay. So other than all of these settings, under instance, under image, we can go ahead and create an AMI, which we will see in the next class. But under the networking settings, you can change the security group of your EC2 instance. So right now he has one security group. You can associate any number of security groups to your EC2 instance depending on how you want it to work. Okay. So security groups is a many-to-one mapping to an EC2 instance. Okay. Then one more thing that you can do is you can attach a network interface, which we will see in the next class. You can also manage IP addresses, which we will see in the next class. Okay. Now going to the monitoring aspects of an EC2 instance, you can just click on the monitoring aspects down. You can see that by default you get basic monitoring from CloudWatch. So this basic monitoring from CloudWatch gives you metrics every 5 minutes of granularity. Yeah, sorry. I don't know how to pronounce that word. So it's granularity. Yeah, it's 5 minutes of granularity that you can get for all of these metrics, right? So you can get CPU utilization. You can get disk read, disk bytes, disk read bytes, disk write bytes. You have network in, network out, network packets in, network packets out. And then you have something regarding your status checks also, which we'll study in a little bit, in a little bit of time. Okay. So you can see over here, all of your metrics are there for 5-minute granularity. But then if you want it for 1-minute granularity, you have to enable detailed monitoring, which is for an extra cost. Okay. And then one more thing that you can do from the monitoring aspects is you can go ahead and look at the status checks. You have two types of status checks over here. You have system status checks and then instance status checks. So instance status checks your software and your network configuration, whether there is network reachability. System status checks whether on your underlying host, whether that host is a healthy host. If both of these pass, you are ready to use your EC2 instance. It's working perfectly fine. But if suppose your system status check does not work properly, it says that only 1 out of 2 status checks have passed and your instance status checks have passed, but your system status checks fails, stop and start your EC2 instance so that it is rebooted on a healthy host in your availability zone in the respective region in AWS's cloud infrastructure. Got the idea? So if your system status check fails, all you have to do is stop and start your EC2 instance so that it's launched on a different host, which is a healthy host, and then wait for your status checks to be available and healthy. Okay. But when your instance status check fails, go ahead and restart. Don't stop and start. Go ahead and restart for your EC2 instance to come back to a healthy status. So this checks the network reachability, whereas this guy goes ahead and checks whether your underlying host is a healthy host or not. Okay. Now under tags, you know that you have to always go ahead and associate meaningful tags to your EC2 instance so that in your billing report or your cost report, you are able to find out these tags are associated with my EC2 instance and this EC2 instance has costed this much. Okay. So keeping all of these things in mind, there is only one more configuration that I would like you to notice regarding scheduled instances. So this is also very much possible. We will just go through the settings of a scheduled instance, not that much part of an exam, but then you can go ahead and purchase scheduled instances. You can specify a schedule. You can specify for how many days you would like that instance. You want this to recur daily or weekly or monthly. Choose your platform details like Linux or Unix. Choose your instance type to be any one of these instance types. And then go ahead and choose the availability zone to be USEs 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, or 1F. And then go ahead and check whether you have any kind of schedule and then go ahead and review and purchase. So this is pretty familiar and similar step to doing that for a reserved instance. So when you do it for reserved instance, you give these details and you say all up front or something like that. But then for scheduled instances, you specify the date and timestamp also. Okay, cool. I just wanted you to note that there is something like that also. And then one more thing that I would like you to note is regarding your limits. Limits are very, very important when you're working with the AWS infrastructure. So you can see over here, we have limits for some big instances to be for dedicated host and all as 0, which we can't create. And then when we go towards some instances like probably the T2 micro instances and so on, we have some other service limits for that. So let's just see regarding T2 micro. So So you have only virtual CPU related metrics. So for on-demand standard, like let's just move this to the side and see. So you can see for over here, for all standard for T instances, you have only 8 virtual CPUs as your service limit, which means at no point of time can more than 8 T2 micro instances run. Before it was actually 20, which they were having before for the number of EC2 instances that you can run, but now it's limited based on the virtual CPU that you can run. So you have to talk to AWS support to increase any one of these service limits. It's very important to note. Okay. And regarding the dashboard of EC2, you get a very nice dashboard where you'll be able to see regarding running instances, elastic IPs, dedicated hosts, snapshots, volumes, load balancers, key pairs, security groups, and placement groups, which we'll study later. And you can see down, you can see that it gives you a button to launch any new EC2 instances. It also tells you the service health. Very, very important to note, because service health is something that tells us and gives us information about whether the region itself and including its availability zones are working properly or not. Okay, so it's monitored by the service health dashboard, but then they have taken a small snippet from there and then they have put it over here for under the EC2. Okay, so this is the new experience. There is also an old experience to EC2, which you can toggle over here and go back to the old dashboard. It's a pretty bad dashboard, but then uh, not nice UI friendly dashboard. So I always like the new one. Okay, so we have seen most of the configurations when it comes to launching EC2 instances, but there are some configurations that we have not looked at regarding volumes and snapshots or lifecycle manager or AMIs. These things will be covered in the next class. And then we will look at also about security groups, elastic IPs, placement groups, key pairs, and network interfaces in the next class. So we'll finish up to this in the next class. And then what we will do in the subsequent classes is, in only one class, we are going to look at load balancers and target groups. And in another class, we are going to look at launch configuration, auto scaling group. So that my best way of teaching is something that I always love to do is exploit most of these configurations on this side. And also when it comes to instances, exploit all of the configurations that are on top regarding the actions and all that. And even when it comes to looking at an EC2 instances, exploit all of the tabs over here, so that you'll get really good idea about what are the different configurations that you can have for your EC2 instance. So I would like you guys to go ahead and launch as many number of EC2 instances as possible within the next week and get familiar about launching EC2 instances. Probably do it for different flavors of operating system for Ubuntu or something like that. If suppose this account is, terminated or something like that, then probably we'll go ahead and get a new account and add all of your IM users back again to that account and give you access to that account. Okay, so we'll see if that's possible. Okay, so until then, as long as this account is there, please go ahead and launch any new instances that you would like. I'm going to stop the recording for any questions that you may have regarding the monitoring aspects or the status checks or anything regarding the actions. Okay.